joined by my friend and colleague Kenji Yoshida. We had planned to make a video about some events in South Korean politics. We had planned that maybe a week or so ago. And in the meantime, South Korean politics jumped into the news like I've not seen in a very long time. So Kenji is back today with some breaking news and some new information about what is, as of right now, it is the afternoon going into the evening of Thursday, December 5th, out here in East Asia. So everything we say is based on what we know at this point in time. Kenji, welcome back. Let's just jump in and let us know what's going on with the really shocking developments about the martial law declaration in South Korea.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Professor Morgan. So I might just go over this short article and give a little background. Most viewers probably already know that martial law was declared late night on Tuesday. President Yoon Suk-yeol in South Korea, he gave a televised address and he declared an emergency martial law. And there are two types of martial law in South Korea, and emergency martial law, of course, it's a more higher version. So it's when there's really imminent sort of threat or imminent sort of natural disaster that needs to be taken care, it's reserved for those emergencies. So it was declared Tuesday night, and immediately there was chaos. The martial law command issued a proclamation that, uh, anybody who opposes martial law rule would be arrested without a warrant. The proclamation also suggested that media publications would go under the military command, and military and police were dispatched to the National Assembly in South Korea, which is located in Yeouido, and they started blockading the entrance of the National Assembly. And in order for the lawmakers to reverse this martial law, there needs to be a vote in the parliament, and majority of the parliamentarians. So South Korea is a 300 unicameral um, chamber, so over 150 has to vote to shut down the martial law. But a lot of people couldn't enter, a lot of lawmakers couldn't enter the assembly building because it was blockaded by military and police officers. So what happened was Lee Jae-myung, the head of the opposition Democratic Party, he sent out, I think, a Twitter and other announcement that, we all lawmakers have to come to the assembly and vote to shut this martial law down. And and after news came out that after President Yoon Suk-yeol's address to the nation, uh, thousands of uh, South Korean citizens gathered in National Assembly and Seoul area to protest this martial law. So eventually, the next day, so this would be Wednesday, around 4:30 a.m., the martial law was overturned, with 190 lawmakers voting to put this down. Um,
Do you know, sorry to cut you off,
no,
do you know how many of the 300 total, do you know how many lawmakers were able to make it to the assembly?
so 190. So just all the 190 people there um, voted.
And it was unanimous
Yeah, and it was
to
unanimous.
rescind. Okay,
Mm.
interesting. Thank you very much.
And some people were there at the site, but they claimed they couldn't enter. Some just physically you know pushed through and went over the fence and entered
Wow.
the building, and it was just a chaotic scene. And yeah. So it was 190 vote. And this is unprecedented, of course. Unprecedented in the sense that there hasn't been any of these martial law declaration in recent years. Since 1948, there have been 16 martial law declaration, excluding the latest one. So President Yoon Suk-yeol's declaration would have been the 17th. And as I wrote here, previous decrees were largely issued under authoritarian regimes in response to extreme situations such as wartime, military coups, and domestic uprisings. So in that sense, it was unprecedented too, because I mean, there really wasn't any reason to declare martial law.
This is one thing
And
I wanted to
Mhm.
get into a little more detail about the reason people were scratching their heads around the world.
Right.
When I first heard it, I thought, there must have been some sort of attempted coup, or there must have been, North Korea must have breached the defenses and been pouring over the border. I mean,
Right.
all sorts of really bad things jumped into my mind, and then as the hours went on, I nobody seemed to know why.
Right.
Do, do we know now what might have prompted this?
Like you said, a lot of, and I've got calls and emails from a couple people, and some people in the US thought it was because of North Korean attack or something, because President Yoon mentioned, anti-state forces.
Right.
He have to put down the anti-state forces, pro-North Korean, factions and all that. So, just people who aren't familiar with all this would probably thought some North Korean attack have happened. But at the moment, we don't exactly know what the motive was for declaring martial law.
Hmm.
But what Yoon said was that he had to, this was sort of his opposition to uh, the uh, the Democratic Party, who's dominating the legislative branch with their majority.
Hmm.
So Yoon believes that the Democratic Party, the opposition Democratic Party, how they're operating in the legislative branch is very dictatorial and authoritarian. So he had to sort of intervene and stop this from, continuing.
But by dictatorial and authoritarian, he means that it's an opposition party, so it's acting as an opposition party would by
Mm,
blocking
right,
legislation and dragging
right,
its feet on procedure and so forth.
right,
So that's what he interpreted as a threat to the
right.
republic that warranted the
Right.
declaration of martial law. But what did he want to do? Do we know? I mean, he
So just to give a little more background, this whole sort of tit for tat between the executive branch and the Democratic Party, the opposition, main opposition, have been going on for months.
Hmm.
And as you know, and we wrote a column on this, how, you know, um, the Democratic Party unilaterally, because they have the majority along with other oppositions, they unilaterally passed legislation seeking, you know, investigation into the president's wife
Right.
or other president's misconduct. And repeatedly, those bills would be shut down, right? Vetoed by the president. And these things, they'll pass a law, president will veto. These things have been going on for months.
Hmm.
And what really sort of came to boiling point recently was the Democratic Party introduced and tried to pass uh, the national budget bill, and
Right.
they severely cut some aspect of the bill, of
Right.
the budget. And that was sort of controversial, at least for Yoon, because it would have affected some of his policies, his signature policies. So he was obviously angered by the opposition trying to pass this, severely cut national budget bill. Also, the Democratic Party was trying to push a motion to impeach three prosecutors.
Right.
And this is quite unprecedented as well. And these prosecutors were also, some of these prosecutors are involved in investigating Lee Jae-myung, the head of the Democratic Party.
I
So,
see.
right, that was controversial, right?
I see.
Yeah, and that those two things really sort of I guess was a tipping point for Yoon, and all that considered he I guess declared martial law. But on your second question, what did he achieve? I don't think he achieved anything really through if anything he the tension between the legislative branch and the executive branch would heighten
Right.
going forward.
Does he have supporters? It seems, I mean, he had unanimous opposition in the legislature. Does he have anybody in his cabinet that's supporting him?
The law, the Constitution suggests that you have to go through a cabinet meeting before you declare a martial law.
Hmm.
So he did have a cabinet meeting. There was a tacit approval, but people didn't really know what was going on within his cabinet as well.
Wow.
So, and it seemed like there were a couple of people who opposed to this idea of declaring martial law, but you just went ahead and declared it.
No.
And it seems like there are reports that this was sort of planned by a very small group of Yoon's inner circle that
Hmm.
includes the Minister of Defense.
Who just, I think he resigned just a couple of hours before we started.
Mm. I might have missed that because I was traveling a little bit, so
I think
maybe.
I could be wrong here. I think the Minister of Defense, if I saw correctly, that he had resigned,
Okay. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it did.
and I think that a new one had already been appointed.
Okay. Um, yeah, so uh as you also the we talked I said a little earlier about 190 lawmakers voted to reverse this martial law, and 18 of those 990 were from the ruling People Power Party, so
Oh,
Yoon's.
so they realized as time went on that this was not something that they wanted to support.
Right, right.
Right. It says here that Yoon has replaced Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun with Choi Byung-hyuk,
Okay.
who's a former ambassador to Saudi Arabia.
Oh yes, yes, yes. That's correct. That's correct. Right, right. There was also report that the former Minister of Defense might flee the country. Um,
Wow. Okay.
So I think the Justice Department has placed him on travel restriction, if I'm correct, something like that.
Where would he go? I mean, everywhere he went, it would seem that he would be quickly apprehended and sent back.
Right, right. It could be just a rumor at this point, but
It's
it really does suggest how tense the situation is right now in South Korea. Uh, and just a little bit more detail. So, the proclamation from the martial law command said they could pretty much arrest anyone. And according to Democratic Party spokesman, there was an attempt to arrest Han Dong-hoon, the head of ruling People Power Party,
right.
and also Woo Won-sik, the Speaker of National Assembly, and there was an attempt to arrest Lee Jae-myung, the head of the Democratic Party.
And what were the charges? Were there any specific charges? It was just martial law, arrest whoever you'd like to arrest.
Yes. So what's interesting is the proclamation said that no political activity is allowed.
Hmm.
So obviously, politician gathering in the National Assembly to vote on a motion would be a political activity. So I guess they deemed it to be against the martial law.
Wow.
Uh, and that's so I'll get into a little bit later about this, but yeah, so that's one of the controversy, one of the big controversy at this point. Um, so yeah, maybe we could just skip to what comes next, right? So just yesterday on Wednesday, the six opposition parties. They drafted a articles of impeachment and they introduced impeachment to the parliament to impeach Yoon.
Hmm.
And I think the main charge is insurrection slash treason. Uh, and it seems like the articles of impeachment will be put to a vote on the 7th, so
Hmm.
2 days from now.
Hmm.
And as you know, they need uh, two-thirds of the 300 seat to pass impeachment
Right.
in the assembly, and then it will go to the constitutional court.
And you said it looks like, well, I guess
Hmm.
we don't know now. It looks like that's not likely to pass.
Right. So at the current parliamentary seating arrangement, the opposition party would require at least eight lawmakers from the ruling People Power Party to support their motion.
Hmm.
But it seems like, at least the most recent news that I heard was that People Power Party, it's their party policy, or it's their party uh, sort of a policy that they would not pursue an impeachment.
Hmm.
And Han Dong-hoon, the head of People Power Party, also said that he would not seek an impeachment of President Yoon.
Hmm.
Um, Although Han Dong-hoon did suggest that y President Yoon should withdraw his membership from the People Power Party.
Hmm.
So it seems like Han Dong-hoon is slowly trying to distance himself from Yoon, and the Yoon being part of the PPP, the People Power Party, is not a good image. So I guess it's a one method uh to try to, further distance the party from the president.
If he survives the impeachment vote,
Mm.
but he has to leave the party or he's kicked out of the party, he has a year and a half, 2 years left on his
I think he has slightly over two years.
years left on his in his term. So he would be a partyless. I think we had talked before, not just a lame duck, but almost a dead duck
Right, right.
for 2 years in office. I have no idea what that means for South Korean politics. He would have a hard time passing legislation,
Mm,
I imagine, and the security angle would be very difficult.
mm,
He's the commander in chief of the South Korean military. Is the same uh, structure in
right,
wartime. He's the commander of the troops, the general commander of the
right,
troops.
right,
He'd be a very weakened commander.
right,
It
right.
would be a very dangerous position for South Korea in many ways.
That's true. Right.
But it looks like he might survive at least
Mm.
the impeachment vote.
As of now, it looks like he would survive. And even if it did pass the parliament, would the Constitutional Court find this as a sort of serious, egregious violation of the Constitution? That's still questionable. And I
Right.
heard, and it seems a bit divided even among leading constitutional law experts in South Korea. Um, so, and the process, but if he does, and I should mention that if it does pass the parliament, Yoon loses um his presidency. So it would there would be an acting president, and that would be the prime minister
Prime Minister.
would take over the role until the Constitutional Court renders its decision. Uh, Yes, but I think it's highly unlikely. But assuming that he's not impeached, there's going to be a growing, and there is already growing public voice to impeach him or to seek his resignation.
Hmm.
And this is going to continue, and it's going to expand, and it's going to grow much larger from now till the end, assuming that he will stay in power until the end of his term. So how long can he really, um, sort of how far can he go with this strong opposition from the public, from the opposition party, and also even within his own party, there are growing voices. And I should mention that a four-term lawmaker, a senior lawmaker in ruling People Power Party, An Cheol-soo, has called for his resignation, President
Hmm,
Yoon's resignation.
hmm.
So there is going to be even internal sort of clash, right? Internally, there's going to be a division.
Oh.
So how far can you take this? It's very questionable at this point.
Two quick follow-up questions. No, a lot is in flux right now. The first one is about a recall vote. Is it possible, even if the impeachment doesn't go through, is it possible to have a recall vote? And the second question is about his policies, the ones that he wanted to get through so badly that he was willing to declare martial law. Were those security related? Were those so very important that it would have justified, even by a stretch, would it have justified calling martial law to get those policies through?
Hmm. Let me take the second question first because I'm not too familiar. I don't exactly know with the first one, the answer to that. I think they could bring up another articles of impeachment, but they can't go with the same reason, right? If they fail once,
Hmm,
they probably need to redraft their articles of impeachment,
hmm,
and they again a two-thirds vote in the parliament to pass the article. But that's I can't don't take my word for that.
hmm,
But I think that's the case with the first question. But second question, no. I've spoken to a couple lawyers,
hmm,
um, and I've spoken to political scientists. There just isn't a good reason to declare martial law. There just
hmm,
wasn't. And um, and there were other ways to perhaps solve these issues that the conflict between the legislative branch and the executive branch and the sort of ongoing tit for tat of passing the bill and vetoing the bill. These things, there are other political methods to to solve these issues, but he never really exhausted these other methods and went sort of straight to martial law.
hmm.
So it was a lot of people probably obviously shocked, but caught off guard because and there were already talks from like in the summer of this year that you might declare martial law.
Hmm.
And these have been floating around, but no one thought he would actually act on it, right?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and he did. So, and some people say that he might do it again.
Again, he might do it again.
Yes.
Okay.
And the guy who said he might do it again is the guy who predicted the first in the summer that this Yoon would is planning to issue martial law.
That's
So,
very interesting.
yeah.
I suppose he could argue now that there are so many people in the streets. He could argue that this is also a kind of insurrection. Could say that
Hmm.
these protests have a danger of becoming an attempt to overthrow the government and so forth. I suppose he could make that argument.
Yeah,
But,
definitely.
but I think what's in the back of a lot of people's minds is South Korea of 60, 70 years ago
Hmm.
when I mean there were serious dangers. There still are serious dangers, but when there was a serious threat of imminent invasion by North Korea and there were pro-North Korean or well, I guess pro-communist forces inside the country
Hmm.
that were that were engaging in all sorts of intimidation and very, very violent political moves.
Right.
I guess a lot of people's minds go back to that. You know, South Korea is a very different place now than it was last time martial law was declared. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that, that
Right.
this is, it just seems so completely uh, uh, anachronistic.
Yeah. what you said was exactly true. Just because people lived through that era, right? There are people still living now who lived through the authoritarian era, and when sorry, military personnel were, in the streets, monitoring your behavior and all that. Uh, and so the image of, military seizing with their, weapons and with their helmet, seizing National Assembly building, and they were suppressing protesters.
Right,
Uh, and This image was really, really, something that Koreans really don't want to see again,
right,
because a lot of people have sacrificed their life to democratize, right? And and a lot has went into, a lot of blood and sweat. So no one thought that this sort of scene would be even possible in this era, but it became a reality recently. So I guess there's mix of, shock and also fear that we might be, somehow, reversing our
right.
time. And I'm certainly not saying that we'll go back to the authoritarian era or that Yoon will suddenly become a dictator. Um, but it just isn't a good image to have, not just domestically, but internationally. I mean, there are a lot of people from Japan and US who are concerned about this, Korea's allies in the US. And and there's also the idea that Yoon utilized the military for his political, purpose.
Right.
And that obviously doesn't bode well with the Korean people. So
On the other hand, I was disturbed. This was just a day or so before everything happened with the martial law. Maybe it was a little bit before that. There were some professors inside the United States who were circulating a petition calling for Yoon. I think it was calling for him to step down.
right.
And I believe this was before all of this started with the martial law.
Mm.
And I was disturbed by that as well. That
Mm.
we seem to be living in the era still of 200 years ago where people in Western countries feel that they can just dictate terms to Asian countries or African countries and say this leader needs to step down and this leader needs to be installed.
Right,
It
right,
showed a great deal of disrespect for South Korean democratic process and for the South Korean people, I thought,
right,
to
right,
have these petitions. It reminded me of 10 or so years ago when there was a similar petition signed by thousands of academics and activists in Europe, United States, North America against what was against the prime minister then of Japan, Abe Shinzo, and some of his policies. And I was appalled at the, the arrogance. These people who feel that they sit in an office on the East Coast of the US and feel they can just dictate terms to the prime minister of Japan who was elected. And he,
right,
whether you don't like him or whether you like him or not, he the people of Japan
right.
liked him. So maybe, a little respect for it's sort of and then with the martial law being declared just a couple of days after that petition was signed that went around, I thought there's a great deal of imbalance on both sides when it comes to respect for democratic processes. Do you have
Mm.
any idea, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's what you said is very interesting because, just the comparison of two extremes, maybe in a sense. And the petition you mentioned, I think it was signed by Bruce Cummings,
Right.
uh, right, and a couple of other American scholars. And when you said that, I was surprised to hear that as well because I can understand to the extent that they might be concerned about South Korea's democracy or the functioning of their liberal democracy and stuff like that.
Right.
But they said in the petition, they said, "Yoon, these are our demand. If you're not gonna, follow through with these demand, then you should resign." what's in their business? Why
Right,
is an American professor, probably no connection to Korea in terms of blood ties or anything,
right,
would even suggest that a country and other sovereign state should resign if they don't,
right.
accept their demand? It just, I
There's a
think,
big difference between criticizing or making a comment on something, saying, I don't agree with this or that policy. It's a huge, I mean, that's fair
right,
game. But to issue a list of demands is a little bit arrogant, I would say. I mean, the man is the leader of a country, and you could say that you don't like the way that he declares martial law at seemingly the drop of a hat. A lot of
right,
people are saying that, but this idea of issuing demands and saying that this politician has to go and this leader has to be taken down, that struck me as, in
right,
many ways, but to me, it was almost worse than the martial law. Like, I think it was worse than the martial law declaration. The martial law is an own goal.
right,
Whatever the reasons were, we don't know. Maybe it will come out that there was something we didn't understand at the moment
right.
and he felt pressure. It could be, we don't know.
That's true, right?
But it seems to be a temporary thing, and the people of Korea are sorting it out by themselves. They'll figure it out and they'll make adjustments. But this idea that's been going around for 500 years that people in the West get to just issue orders,
Right,
people in Asia and Africa and Latin America have to say, yes,
right.
I will do it right away. That seems to be a much bigger problem.
You, yeah, I agree. Because technically, Yoon had the right to do that, right? Yoon followed legal procedures to issue martial law, and
Right,
whether he had a legitimate reason, legitimate cause to do it, that's up to the courts and others to decide. But the arrogance of these American scholars to think that they know about what's going on in Korea, what the political situation is deeper down, right? What the whole situation is, because they only probably watch the news and think they know what's going on. But there's deeper side to all this,
right,
how the politics is played out in South Korea. So, and to them to demand and to ask for resignation, it seemed just way out of their place to do something like that. And it's like if Korean scholars, purely Korean scholars, wrote a petition demanding, say, Biden to step down because of his cognitive, disorder.
right,
What would Americans, say to that? I mean,
right.
probably the embassy would complain. I'm pretty sure.
I think certainly they would complain, and there would be threats of cutting funding for grants or
Right,
whatever the program was. There would be, if the shoe was on the other foot, it would not fit very well.
right, right,
It's one thing to say that there are problems with, I completely agree with if there were criticisms of the current occupant of the White House, I would say, you're probably being a little bit too kind and you should crank the criticism up a little bit. I have no problem with that at all. But as you said, it's it's when someone in a foreign country arrogates to him or herself the power to pick and choose leaders of countries that
right,
are not even in their hemisphere. You
right,
start to think, you know, there's a difference between criticism and being a little dictator. And,
right, right.
it's a colonial mindset that just won't go away. And Bruce Cummings is he's a very well-known man of the left. He's been on the left for his entire career, as far as I've known.
Mm,
He's
mm.
been involved in Korean politics. I mean, studying it.
Right, right,
So he has every right to say what he thinks about it. I don't,
right,
even if he
right,
doesn't know, he has the right to say what he thinks.
right.
But at the same time, it's not a good look
Mm, mm.
when when a country that when a hemisphere that has a very long-standing problem with going into other people's countries and killing leaders and telling them what to do and taking their resources and enslaving their people and trying to govern hundreds of millions of people that have nothing to do with their own people.
Right,
It's a very bad look when
right,
someone just says, "Hey, you know what? I don't like your president. It's time for you to step down unless you do A, B, and C."
Right. I mean, I was really just surprised by that petition. Um, I mean, it's one thing. And for instance, if South Korean scholars issued a petition of concern, for instance, Biden's support to Israel, right?
Right.
His blindly supporting Israel, or Ukraine. These things make sense, and it makes sense because Korea is involved in Ukraine war in many ways.
Right.
And but what the petition I think talked about was largely domestic issues,
Hmm.
right? With president's wife, with
Right. It was in there.
president, right, and the president not accepting special counsel investigation into his alleged misconduct and
Right.
purely domestic related stuff. So maybe they could say that, you should accept, the special counsel bill for, and to investigate this thoroughly. Something like that might have been better. But to demand something and say, if you don't accept, resign, is a bit much.
Yeah, it's a bit much. It was a bit much. Yeah, I think it was you and I have written about various things inside of South Korea and other countries, and
Right.
we've given our views on it. And uh, I it it's been a problem for a very long time. I've seen this in American academia for a long time. That petition that went around about 10 years ago, calling very sternly criticizing the government of Japan
Hmm.
and and basically issuing a list of demands, the things that they wanted to see done, so forth.
Okay. And that
The
that American scholar, largely American scholars.
largely American scholars, it started out in a academic conference in the United States, and the first signatories were largely American scholars. And then the signat people signing started to balloon, and the number went into the thousands, I believe, eventually.
Hmm.
And I haven't run a statistical analysis of where everybody was from. It
Right.
could be that in the end, the people who signed were even more from outside the US than inside the US.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, even so,
Right.
it's a little bit, yeah.
Right.
And that issue was about one other thing that you and I had wanted to touch on. The issue of that petition 10 years ago was about something that has again come back into the news in South Korea
Okay.
before everything started with the martial law, and that was another person surnamed Yun Mi-hyang,
Oh, okay.
who had just very happened. I don't think she's related at all to the current
No.
president, just happens to have the same surname, Yun Mi-hyang. Yun Mi-hyang was that petition that went around 10 years ago about the Japanese government that involved the comfort women controversy, and the the person who has been one of the people at the center of that controversy is Yun Mi-hyang. Maybe you could talk a little bit about her, what she was doing, and she was recently convicted. She was found guilty, I believe.
Yes.
And
Right.
this is a big story, and it involves again a lot of people in Western universities issuing demands and making issuing orders to people in East Asia without knowing what's going on. And it
Mhm.
turns out that things were very different.
Right. Right. What was one of their demand? Do you remember about Yu Mihang? Was there some demand
Well, there
concerning?
wasn't a demand about her specifically.
Mm.
It was about the comfort women.
Okay.
And
Okay.
the scholars who were signing these petitions, they were in my opinion, they were morally grandstanding about the comfort women issue and how
Okay.
this is uh, um, uh, I don't think they use the word travesty, but this is something that should not be. And it turns out that there was a lot more going on than the simplistic more morality play
Mm.
that it looked like to me. And Yoon Mi Hyung was, it turns out now that she had been defrauding
Right.
a
Right.
lot of actual comfort women, a lot of women who were, this is not a theoretical academic exercise. These are women who I think were working in comfort stations, And in their old age, they were being defrauded by someone who claimed to be speaking up for them.
Right.
Quite shocking. Do you have any of the details of what she was convicted of?
Yes. So Yu Mihang was, of course, the head of the Korean Council, the largest comfort woman advocacy group in South Korea and probably the world. And she headed that organization for very long. And after that, she became a lawmaker,
Hmm.
a parliamentarian in South Korea. And while she was heading the organization, there were allegations that she defrauded comfort women and defrauded the government in getting funding from the government,
Hmm.
and she used it for her own sort of purpose. And if I remember correctly, embezzlement, fraud, uh, and slew of other charges. And she was convicted recently. The Supreme Court uh, upheld the conviction. Uh, and it was a when the allegation first came out that the Korean Council was defrauding former comfort women and Yoon Mi-hang was using these grandmas to benefit her. It was shocking because a lot of Koreans trusted this organization. Even those who weren't really familiar with the comfort woman issue, they donated to this organization monthly because they knew that this was very tragic history for South Korea. And then they later learned that, they were, defrauding all these people and committing these crimes and even former comfort women, they publicly reprimanded Yu Mi-hang for
Right,
her act
right,
for you know uh defrauding them.
right.
Um, so and she I guess it's important to mention that the Korean Council is obviously has really close connection to North Korea, and I
Right.
think you've also written a book with Professor Remzier on the details of the Korean
Right.
Council and their actions.
He did some research with Professor Arima
Right.
Tetsuo here at in Japan, and they found some
Mhm.
really shocking things
Shocking
about Yoon
stuff.
Mi-hyung and the Korean Council. And three of her relatives, I think her husband, and then his sister, and then another relative were, I think, convicted, and some of those were
Yes.
overturned later, but they were convicted of passing documents to North Korean agents.
Right.
The whole comfort women thing it has a North Korean connection top to bottom.
Right. Right.
It's it's not what it seems.
Mm.
It seemed on the outside it seems like a very good thing to help these elderly women who have had a very hard life, but there are some really bad actors inside of it who are taking advantage of them.
Right.
And what's shocking to me also is that when these things come out, the people in American academia who claim to be uh, sympathetic towards the comfort women,
Mm.
as far as I've been able to tell, they haven't said anything about Yoon Mi-hyung's conviction. The people who were shouting on Korean television 4 years ago
Right.
about how awful Mark Ramsire is and how he's a misogynist, and the people who were the same people who were attacking uh, Professor Lee Sok-chun,
Right.
who was going to go to jail for asking questions about the history of the comfort women. The people who were saying that these scholars were they should be fired and they should be put in jail and so forth, and that Yoon Mi-hyung and the Korean Council were doing wonderful things. When it turned out that Yoon Mi-hyung was defrauding the comfort women, literally stealing their money and buying things for herself and giving money to her relatives and so forth, and that in the background is North Korea,
Mm.
nothing. They say nothing. I
Right.
think that's but they will sign petitions saying the South Korean president should step down.
Right.
but
Right.
they won't utter a syllable about North Korea
Right.
connections and Yoon Mi-hyung. It's really quite shocking.
Right. I mean, it's amazing. Where are they?
Where are they?
Nowhere to be seen,
They're
these people.
nowhere to be seen. Professor Liu was exonerated, thank God. I think, you and I have discussed this at great length. He
Mm.
went through hell with, I mean, a criminal trial.
Right.
The man was on trial
Right.
for telling the truth.
Right.
And he basically, it wasn't even for that, he was just asking a question in a
Right.
university lecture,
Right. Right.
and he was being prosecuted. Where were these great champions of liberal democracy
Right.
when there was a man on trial fighting for his freedom?
Right.
It's
No.
quite shocking.
Yeah. It is.
Nowhere.
Yeah.
Have the comfort women, have the elderly women, have they issued any kind of statement? Have they been able to speak freely about Yoon's conviction?
Um, I don't know, because I haven't really been following the woman issue lately. But I don't think they've issued anything publicly.
Hmm,
And part of the reason I think is because comfort woman issue isn't really in the headlines after Yoon took office.
right.
It was obviously in the predecessor Moon Jae-in era. It was one of the big issue between Japan and South Korea. But President Yoon didn't make an issue out of this comfort woman
Hmm,
when he took office, and there really isn't a whole lot of news about comfort woman.
hmm,
In South Korea right now. So I think they're probably they're not really encouraged to do these things right now because
hmm.
it won't. First of all, it probably won't get a whole lot of media attention, and it won't really garner a lot of support from the public as
Wow.
well. Um, yeah, and it's interesting because going back to the Bruce Cummings petition, uh, the left-wing media in Korea introduced this petition as saying, "Hey, look, even Western scholars are seeking Yoon's removal from office,
Hmm,
as if it gives more sort of credential, it gives more authority to this claim that he should be removed
hmm,
from office." And I'm surprised that no conservative media um, wrote an article on this
hmm.
from the opposite standpoint, from what we think is a infringement, almost an interference in sovereign states' business.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It'd
so
be interesting to write an article like that.
you
And we should also contact Bruce Cummings and the other Western scholars who signed this petition. We could say, hello, who the hell are you? Who the hell do you think you are? Issue demands to a foreign country's
oh,
government who died and made you king.
one interesting thing, Bruce Cummings, and this might just in very short um, summary. So Park
Right.
Yoo-ha was a professor for the viewers who don't know. She was also a professor who wrote a book on comfort women and stood trial for her controversial book on
Right.
comfort women, and she was acquitted after 10 years in the Supreme Court. Um, she also, while she was um, facing trial, there was a petition going around in support of Park Yoo-ha
Right.
and her right to, publish whatever book she wants.
Right.
Miss Cummings was one of the signatories to the petition,
Hmm.
and I contacted him for Lou's petition, Loo Sok-chun, our petition,
Right.
and he never responded.
Hmm.
So that's the kind of hypocrisy or the double standard that they have, that they would pick and choose. It's not they're these liberal scholars in the US, not just US, but probably elsewhere. They say they're for free speech, they say they're free speech advocates, and they're you know, it, you know, but they have different standards.
Yep.
They'll pick and choose what sort of speech they would support and what they wouldn't.
Exactly right. They like to be in the spotlight. They like to grandstand about these things. They're little imperialists, a lot of them. When you scratch beneath the surface,
Okay.
you find that they have deeply disturbing views about places outside of Europe and North America.
Mm.
Deeply held, very disturbing views.
Right, right.
And they very cavalierly issue demands to people who live in countries that they consider not to be worthy
Mm.
of their respect.
Uh-huh.
And it
Yeah.
happens again and again and again.
Mm.
And they will pretend that they use people just like the American scholars used the comfort women issue, where they used the Park High issue to burnish their own reputation. And they will go on X and announce to the world that they're doing this great thing.
Right,
But then when the situation is changed, new
right.
facts come to light.
Yeah,
Doesn't exist. We're on to the next thing.
yeah.
Happens again and again. I
Right,
I wish I could issue martial law proclamations in American academia and have the whole lot of them arrested.
right. I bet a lot of people would support that in the US. A
I
lot
would
of
get a lot of support, and I would have 85% in the polls if I did that. Just
right.
just frog march them out of the universities. You and you and you and you and you. Just get out of here. That would be a
Maybe
lot of fun.
right, but maybe not to that extreme, but maybe Trump might be willing to do, I don't know if he has time to even deal with the education, you know, but I hope he gets this wokeness out of
That'd be nice. Yeah.
everywhere, really. Not just the military, but
You've been fighting for free speech for a long time, Kenji, and I think you know we got to get back to a time where you disagree with someone and you just say, "Have a nice life."
right,
I mean, I just talked about arresting everybody in the universities, but you got to get back to a time where you just leave people alone if they say something you don't like.
right,
Uh, you know, you don't need to get them fired. That's what the American academics have been doing for a long time now. They've
right,
tried to get many people fired.
right. And you've been obviously target of these wokeness.
Yeah, very minor. I got a few little darts in the back, or I should say all my scars are in the front.
Right.
They
Well, I mean, you've also written a book, obviously, so about that. I don't think it's minor, really. I mean, it's
No, it's
obviously
not. I mean, with
relative.
me or in general?
You, what you've went
Oh,
through.
well, with me, I
That's
mean, it's nothing compared to Dr. Liu and Mark
mm,
Ramsire.
true.
They they I mean, they were fighting for their freedom, for their jobs, reputations.
Right.
And once it happened to them, we started to look up other instances. It has happened to a lot of people
Wow.
in South Korea and in North America and in Europe. And it's really it's a fatal wound in any society when people start to do this kind of thing.
Right.
It really
Right.
is. All right, Kenji. Well, thank you for the update. As soon as we finish this video, I have a feeling that something's going to change again and it's going to be obsolete. I don't
Right.
know. It's been a heck of a few days out here in East Asia.
Right.
Hope it calms down a little bit and we can all take a deep breath and
Right.
maybe we'll have another video to make about something much happier next week.
Hopefully.
All
Hopefully.
right. Thank you very much, Kenji, as always, for sharing your wisdom and your insight, and we'll see you
Thank you.
back here soon.